if you had to choose, three tips for writing short stories, it might be a difficult one to hone in on, but what would you say to that?
I think, and I've had plenty of experience with this question because with Raconteur, I have the blessing and the curse of reading several hundred submissions for every issue. And we get anywhere between, 200 to 500 submissions for an issue. And you only have about 5, 6, 7 stories make it. And so the actual selection process becomes a very daunting sort of thing. And how we've sort of overcome that is by having a completely democratic approach where all of our readers vote on the stories that they want to see the most. And Mackenzie, I'll tell you that the stories that get voted the most have very clear patterns in terms of how they're structured. And that's something that I go really in depth into the workshops. Regardless of what story you're trying to tell, there has to be some type of pattern of how the story is structured. So for example, one of the top tips that I would give is to start with a good hook. I've seen so many great, fantastic stories start with a first sentence about the weather or about, something completely ordinary. Whereas some of the best stories have started with, I didn't see him and the guy's just lying in front of the car and it starts right in the action, right? So essentially, you don't want to bury your lead. And the whole goal of the story, if you think about it from an analytical side, is you want sentence number 1 to lead to sentence number 2 to lead to, number 3 and number 4 and number 5. So you keep the reader hooked. And that's something that these clickbaity emails have absolutely mastered, that a lot of people, because they have the story in their head, if you want to tell a story, you already know more or less what's going to happen. And so in your mind, there's always time for you to give away all the cliffhangery, the hook essentially. But from a reader who's never read it before, they only see the words that are on the page. And so making a conscious effort to have something that hooks the reader in, a lot of our stories that we, even give a second look to have amazing hooks. And so that's number 1. I think number 2 is exactly what I mentioned before, is people should really go deep with their stories and not wide. And what I mean by that is really dive deep into the heart of one scene as opposed to skimming 10 scenes. Some of the best stories that I've read have had a day in the life or one major decision or one major life event, something that changes the person's viewpoint or that changes their personality somewhat. Third piece of advice, I would say, and just to keep it even, I would say on endings, I think there's a very fine line of when you end the story, right? I had the story that I was writing. It was this memory, right? And so the story starts off with when I was a kid, I used to do this, and it goes into the story. I used to go to my grandma's house, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end, it's but now I understand what she was trying to tell me. And, one of the fantastic writers actually in my critique group said, Tev, why are you putting this story into a framing device? Just remove when I was a kid and remove at the very end, but now I understand, and say the whole story from the kid's perspective. It's essentially cutting straight to the bone of what you're trying to say, eliminating that fluff. And how that relates to endings is that you either have an ending that leaves you wanting way more, or you have an ending where the climax concludes and then there's 3 more pages of resolution that's saying way too much. To find that fine balance of an ending is something that will make your story so much better than it already is, because you don't want to ever frustrate the reader by cutting it too early and having the reader being what happened? And you don't want to have Frodo throw the ring into, the volcano and then talk about him having a family with children. The story's over.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely, that's funny.
That's the third piece, yeah.